The family tree is the first warning, then the coin, not the soft-focus Cleopatra of romance, but a ruler stamped in metal, surrounded by family names that could become death sentences. Ptolemy Theaid, younger brother, husband in title, rival in war, dead after defeat in 47 BC. Ptolemy XIV, another brother-husband, another co-ruler, gone a few years later, with poisoning treated as a serious ancient tradition and historical inference, not a certainty. Arsinoe IV, sister, rebel queen, surviving claimant, later executed far from Egypt after Antony's men acted, according to Plutarch and Appian, at Cleopatra's request. 3 siblings, 3 different kinds of threat. 3 different levels of evidence. This was not an isolated scandal. It was the logic of the Ptolemaic throne, marriage as a political lock, co-rule as a trap, survival as the last name left standing. So before we ask whether Cleopatra was victim, villain, or genius, the colder question is this: what kind of system makes family elimination feel like statecraft? The answer begins with a problem you can almost hold in your hand: a source card, a coin, a name on a timeline, all surviving through enemy hands. Much of the story passes through Roman writers such as Plutarch, Appian, and Cassius Dio, writing after Cleopatra's enemies had won. A dangerous foreign queen was useful to Rome, but hostile does not mean worthless. These writers preserve names, dates, accusations, public consequences, and details their moral judgments cannot fully erase. A recorded death is not proof of motive. A political benefit is not a confession. A Roman insult is not history, so the family tree cannot become a crime scene yet. We sort it 4 ways: evidence, inference, propaganda, and legend. Coins, titles, timelines, and ancient testimony go first. Succession logic is marked separately. Rome's preferred story stays in red. Only then can we ask what Cleopatra was: victim, ruthless operator, or a ruler shaped by a dynasty where family was both legitimacy and danger. To see that dynasty clearly, we have to rewind before her crisis, into the bloodline that taught her what a throne could cost. Pull the family tree backward, and Cleopatra's bloodline leads into the wreckage of Alexander the Great's empire. When Alexander died, his generals divided his empire, and Ptolemy took Egypt. The ruling house that followed was Greek Macedonian, seated on an Egyptian throne. Start in Alexandria. A Mediterranean court city, Greek language, administration, libraries, scholars, soldiers, merchants, and palace factions. Then move south, onto temple walls along the Nile. There, the same dynasty appears as pharaohs, making offerings to Egyptian gods, using ancient royal imagery to tell priests and subjects that this foreign house belonged inside the sacred order. That double image is the first clue. In Alexandria, the Ptolemies were Hellenistic monarchs. In Egyptian temple space, they performed pharaonic kingship. Inside the palace, legitimacy had to be kept close. That is where sibling marriage enters as statecraft, not gossip. By marrying brothers to sisters, the dynasty kept blood, property, titles, and divine claims inside one house. A sister wife could strengthen a king's claim. A brother husband could make co-rule look continuous and sacred. But the same arrangement turned family into a field of rival claims. If your brother is your husband, he can be king without you. If your sister is your wife, she can be queen against you. Children, half-siblings, mothers, courtiers, and commanders could gather around another Ptolemy and call that candidate legitimate. So the question changes. It is no longer, why would Cleopatra fear her siblings? It is, how could she not? By Cleopatra's generation, this was a recurring dynastic pattern, not a law that worked the same way every time. Family gave you the right to rule, and family gave rivals the same right. She inherited Greek court politics in an Egyptian sacred frame, sibling marriage as legitimacy, and blood relatives as the most dangerous people in the palace. Next came her father's damaged crown, and the break around his children. The crown Cleopatra inherited was already damaged by her father's reign, Ptolemy XII Auletes. He survived because Rome was becoming impossible to ignore. His reign carried dependence on Roman support, heavy financial obligations, and the legitimacy problem of a king driven from the throne and restored with foreign help. So Cleopatra inherited a kingdom watched by Roman creditors, Roman politicians, and Egyptian court factions that had already seen a throne bend under outside pressure. Then, in 51 BC, the danger acquired a name. Cleopatra, still young, was placed in formal rule with her younger brother, Ptolemy II. Under Ptolemaic custom, this likely meant sibling marriage as well as co-regency. It was not romance, it was paperwork, theology, dynasty, and power. Ptolemy III was a child, which made him vulnerable and useful. Advisors and palace officials could gather around his name and turn him into a rival government. Cleopatra might be older and more capable, but capability was not the only currency in Alexandria. A male Ptolemy with the right handlers could become a banner. At the beginning of her reign, the trap was simple. One throne, two royal names. Rome outside the doors, factions inside the palace. Cleopatra's first struggle was not to charm a Roman general. It was to stop her brother-husband from becoming the weapon that removed her. Soon, the split throne became a war map. Cleopatra is pushed out of Alexandria, while the government speaking in Ptolemy II's name holds the capital, palace, and machinery of legitimacy. On paper, he remains co-ruler. In practice, his court has made him the face of a coup. Then Rome's civil war arrives at Egypt's door. Julius Caesar comes to Egypt in 48 BC, chasing Pompey, his defeated Roman rival. He enters a dynastic war sitting on Roman debt, Egyptian grain, and a throne both sides claim. For Cleopatra, Caesar is not a fairy tale rescue. He is leverage strong enough to break the deadlock. The famous story of Cleopatra reaching Caesar in secret survives because it is vivid. Ancient versions show her smuggled past hostile forces into the palace, sometimes wrapped in bedding or a sack. The detail may be sharpened by storytelling, but the political fact matters. Cleopatra gets herself into the room with the man whose soldiers and authority can tilt Egypt's succession. Caesar chooses arbitration, but arbitration backed by Roman force is not ordinary neutrality. Cleopatra is restored beside Ptolemy III, and the boy king's faction resists. Alexandria becomes a battlefield of palace blocks, harbor routes, and access to the Nile Delta. The fighting ends in defeat for Ptolemy's side. In 47 BC, after Caesar's forces prevail, Ptolemy III disappears from the board. Ancient accounts describe him dying while fleeing, commonly by drowning in the Nile. We do not need to put Cleopatra at the riverbank. The evidence does not require it. For the succession story, the result is enough. Her first brother-husband, the child whose name had been used against her, is gone. Cleopatra returns as the Ptolemaic ruler Caesar recognizes. Rome's intervention has helped remove her immediate rival, but the system does not allow an empty space to remain empty. A queen still needs dynastic cover. A co-ruler still has to be named. When Ptolemy II is crossed out, the family tree makes room for the next brother. Into that empty space steps Ptolemy XIV, less a person in the record than a constitutional necessity. His name gives the throne the expected shape: queen and king, sister and brother, two royal signatures where one woman alone might look exposed. But now look at the branch growing beside him. Caesarion, born after Cleopatra's alliance with Julius Caesar, changes the succession board. He is a possible heir with Cleopatra's blood, Ptolemaic legitimacy, and Caesar's name attached. For a queen restored through Roman force, that combination is extraordinary. It is also dangerous. As long as Ptolemy XIV lives and formally rules beside her, Caesarion's path is not clean. The younger brother remains a male Ptolemy. His name could give courtiers, priests, soldiers, or Roman decision-makers another banner if Cleopatra became inconvenient. Then, in 44 BC, Julius Caesar is assassinated in Rome. Cleopatra loses her strongest Roman patron, and Egypt's succession question tightens. That same year, Ptolemy XIV dies. This is the midpoint puzzle. When a death leaves exactly the succession Cleopatra needs, what can the record actually prove? Ancient tradition treats poisoning as the likely explanation, and modern historians often read the timing and benefit as suspicious. The political logic is clear. With Ptolemy XIV gone, Caesarion can be elevated as co-ruler, and Cleopatra can govern through her son rather than another brother-husband. But there is no confession and no neutral autopsy from Alexandria. The mechanism remains an inference, built from absence, timing, benefit, and later reporting. The safer claim is the result. Ptolemy XIV disappears from the active line. Caesarion moves forward. Cleopatra's throne is no longer balanced against a brother who could become a rival king. It is anchored to a child whose claim depends on her. One brother died in war, another died under suspicion. The board now turns toward the sibling still alive, still royal, and still capable of becoming a banner for revolt, Arsinoe. With the brother line narrowed, the danger moves sideways, to the sister, who had already proved she could become a queen. Arsinoe IV was not a decorative name. During the Alexandrian War, while Cleopatra and Caesar fought for the city, Arsinoe was proclaimed queen by forces opposed to them. For a moment, she was an alternative Ptolemaic future. After Caesar's victory, Arsinoe was taken to Rome and displayed in his triumph. That mattered. A Roman triumph turned defeated rulers into living trophies, proof that Rome had mastered them. But Arsinoe survived. Caesar spared her, and she was sent from Egypt to Ephesus, where she took refuge at the Temple of Artemis. In theory, sanctuary should have changed the rules. Artemis's sanctuary was sacred space, one of the great religious sites of the Eastern Mediterranean. A person who reached sanctuary was supposed to be protected by the authority of the goddess and the fear of violating her ground. But sanctuary did not erase bloodline. Plutarch and Appian report that Arsinoe was killed at Ephesus by forces connected to Mark Antony. They framed the act as carried out at Cleopatra's request. The attribution should stay where the sources place it. Cleopatra is not shown standing in the temple with a weapon. Antony's power is the instrument. Cleopatra's interest is the motive named by the tradition. That distinction does not soften the event. It shows how far dynastic security could reach once Cleopatra had Roman power beside her. Cleopatra could use Roman relationships to reach beyond Egypt, into a foreign sanctuary, and remove a dynastic rival who had already once been raised against her. Arsinoe's death breaks two protections at once: blood and sanctuary. Sisterhood did not save her. Sacred ground did not save her. Distance from Alexandria did not save her. Once Roman force could settle Ptolemaic family claims, the story could no longer remain an Egyptian court tragedy. The alliance that secured Cleopatra's bloodline pulled her deeper into Rome's struggle, where Antony, Octavian, and propaganda would decide what the world remembered. After the sanctuary, the battlefield widens. Armies on one side, language on the other. For Octavian, Antony and Cleopatra were difficult to describe. If he presented the conflict as one Roman fighting another, he looked like another warlord tearing the Republic apart. Rome had already survived Caesar and Pompey, proscriptions, assassinations, and civil war. The public did not need another reminder that Roman power was eating itself, so Octavian changed the frame, away from Roman civil war, onto Cleopatra. The enemy became Cleopatra, a foreign queen, a monarch, a woman with Egyptian wealth, ships in the Eastern Mediterranean, and a son she presented as Caesar's child. That last point mattered. Caesarion was a possible rival symbol to Octavian's own claim as Caesar's heir. The propaganda worked because it turned a succession threat into a moral story. Antony's political alliance became enslavement to an Eastern queen. Cleopatra's treasury became decadence. Her languages, diplomacy, and dynastic strategy became seduction. A ruler who threatened Rome with money, fleets, legitimacy, and succession was easier to sell as a moral infection. This does not mean Roman sources should be discarded. Plutarch, Appian, Cassius Dio, and others preserve details we cannot ignore. But they wrote in a world where Augustus won, and winners shaped the labels attached to the defeated. Later centuries inherited that image. Not Cleopatra, the Hellenistic monarch on coins and temple walls, but Cleopatra, the dangerous enchantress. Literature, painting, theatre, and film repeated the easier version instead of the harder one. A ruler born into a killing dynasty, using Roman power to survive, until Roman power turned back toward Alexandria. That turn brings us to Actium, where propaganda, bloodlines, and empire meet on the same water. At Actium, propaganda and power finally pointed the same way, toward Alexandria. When Octavian entered Egypt in 30 BC, the family tree we began with was almost empty. Ptolemy the Sigh was dead after the Nile campaign. Ptolemy XIV was gone, with poisoning the traditional but debated explanation. Arsinoe IV had been executed far from Egypt, in a sanctuary that should have protected her. Caesarion, Cleopatra's son by Julius Caesar, now carried the most dangerous name in the Mediterranean. Octavian could use Cleopatra's image, reshape it, and make it serve his victory. Caesarion was harder to leave alive. Ancient accounts report that he was killed after the conquest, removing the last major claimant who joined Ptolemaic blood to Caesar's legacy. Cleopatra's own death quickly became legend. The snake gave later storytellers a clean image, theatrical, memorable, almost too perfect. Ancient sources often describe suicide, by snake or poison, but the exact method remains uncertain. What is not uncertain is what ended with her. Ptolemaic Egypt disappeared as an independent kingdom. Egypt became part of Roman power, a controlled source of grain, wealth, and strategic security. So the final image is not a love story frozen in a tomb. It is the empty throne behind the myth. Cleopatra was not the seductress Rome invented, and not simply the monster a family tree can make her seem. She was the last ruler of a dynasty where brothers, sisters, husbands, wives, and children could all become rival claims. She survived that system longer than almost anyone around her. By the end, the bloodline had consumed itself, and Rome took what was left,